Hi, my name is Lowell Joseph Gallen, and I am glad to introduce our studio audience and our viewers and listeners to this evening's program in our Root and Branch Association English Language Conference and Lecture program, hosted here at the OU Israel Center in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm always proud to say the year of our lecture series, proud to say that we are now celebrating the 22nd year of our lecture series here at the OU Israel Center in Jerusalem. Our series started on January 1995. Our speaker for this evening's program is Dr. Yitzchak Kerem. Dr. Kerem is founder of the Heritage Center for Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish Communities. Our program chair for this evening's program is Dr. Les Glassman, originally of South Africa. I'm originally of New York. And having said that, we'll now get on with the show. Dr. Kerem, please.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Now, we're in the studio here. We're only 7, which is parallel to the number of Jewish families which remained in the last few hundred years in Kaifeng. There used to be more, but anyway. So what I wanted to do, although the PowerPoint didn't come out well here, I wanted to give you a historical overview of the history of the Jews of Kaifeng, to show what kind of special community it is, and then to talk about the problem now about the denial of religious freedom. Do you hear me now?
Very good.
So, I don't remember what all the titles were, but basically you have this community since about the 12th century as an organized Jewish community. So we're talking about Jews who are in Kaifeng, China, southwest of Beijing, maybe 300 miles, for 800 years, all through various dynasties. They did well. It's along the Silk Route. So essentially it's a community of Persian Jews, Jews of Persian extraction, who are merchants and fabric merchants, silk merchants, etc., etc. You know, we were in traditional times. People were very religious, very traditional. And like everything, we don't know so much about what happened in the past, but we actually have a good amount of fragments and they're mentioned. And it's not such a community that was cut off so long ago, so there was a lot of communication between them and the rest of the world. You may not be aware, but there's a whole Persian Jewish diaspora. All the central republics, they're of Persian Jewish culture. So everything from Iran, Afghanistan, all throughout, all the Stani, Uzbekistan, etc., all those people are from Persian Jewish culture. And you find all sorts of interesting phenomena in this community, because you even had Yemenite merchants who were part of this culture too. They went all over. And so some of the theories of where these people came from include Yemenite merchants from Iraq, from Babylonia, of a Persian Jewish culture, who stopped in this place, which was the head of the capital of the dynasty, and they set up shop. Every time there was a war, a new kingdom, a takeover, the Jews fled, the Jews were harmed, the synagogues were destroyed, and it's a story of everything being rebuilt. As opposed to most other Jewish communities, you know, you have persecution, but you don't have so much natural disasters. You don't have such a switch of regimes all the time. Here you had many different regimes, and also this town was on the Yellow River. So the river would flood a lot. And, that would cause the cemetery to be ruined, the Jewish quarter, the city to be ruined. One time there was a peasant rebellion, and the authorities flooded the city, and of course it affected the Jews. Maybe out of 600,000 people, 300,000 were killed, and the Jews are parallel in that estimate, and then they leave the city, they come back. So, let's see what we have here. Now, what you have here, we don't have like archaeological excavations from 2,000 years ago, but we have these pillars in the city, and we have what's called the stele. They're these plates, these tablets, which show and indicate the history of the Jewish community and the history of the city. So that's, in a lot of cases, that's why we have references to them. So, one of the dynasties they were part of was the Song dynasty. It was actually the Northern Song dynasty. And the Jews, like everything, like traditionally, they were proficient in what they did. They learned Chinese, they learned Confucianism, they passed the test to be civil servants, and they were part of the structures. A new regime comes, they're low on the totem pole, they're looked as alien, it takes them time to integrate. But every time the city was destroyed, the Jews bought more property. So that's also how they became accomplished. So we know they had Hebrew names in the first 8 to 9 generations. And then when the city was sacked in 1127, some of them settled in Hangzhou. Like 20 years ago, it was thought that Kaifeng was the only community, but there are about 9 of them. None of them lasted. But, so this is a very rare phenomenon. Okay, so again, so they had a synagogue, then they rebuilt it again, and then Kaifeng became the capital of another dynasty from 1214 to 1233, and then they fell to the Mongols, but the Jews flourished for centuries. So I tried to document every few decades what happened. I can't see some of these things.
Actually, if you highlight over the text, you can probably read it.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Highlight the
I can't see that though. Alright, comes out dark. But I'm in black. Okay, anyway. In 1421, the Jews received permission to rebuild the synagogue, and they placed an imperial tablet in the synagogue in honor of the Ming Emperor. In 1461, a flood destroyed the synagogue and it was rebuilt, and they received donations from other Jewish communities like in Ningbo and Yangtze. Here I don't know what I wrote.
last names.
Okay, so yeah, I had, initially there were 17 last names. Okay, they're all very short, like Li, Zhu, etc., etc. I don't know by heart, so I can't tell you. So the Jews, they didn't dress distinctively. They dressed like all the other Chinese people, so they look very traditional. Their customs are different. So when I went to Kaifeng in 1994 for a Jewish Studies Conference, and we saw this museum which had a replica of the old synagogue, which the synagogue is in a style of a Romaniote synagogue, a Judeo-Greek late Hellenistic style. Okay, and it had the tablets, had a lot of pictures, it had all sorts of stuff. that, of course, is closed. It's off limits today because of this ban. But they had a dinner for us. It was like a vegetarian dinner, vegetarian kosher dinner. And they had 40 types of fruit that they would eat. The only thing I recognized was dates. But all these, they claim that all these were from the Shivat, meaning our 7 different species. I don't remember, I can't find the book, but there's someone I met in the National Library, he lives in Hebron. He wrote a book about the special customs of the Kaifeng Jews. It's pretty detailed, it's pretty distinct also. Alright, so in 1642, the Ming army broke the dam to put down the peasant rebellion, which I referred to before. More than half the 600,000 residents of Kaifeng were killed. The Jewish population shrunk from 5,000 to 2,500. By the way, most communities in Spain were not that big. Okay. So then the synagogue, of course, was destroyed, the Sifrei Torah, Jewish homes, but there were some people who swam into the flood and rescued manuscripts. So we have those manuscripts now. How do we have the manuscripts? Essentially from missionaries. Jesuit missionaries took an interest in these communities. Of course, they wanted to missionize these people. But for the Jews, that was their key to the outside world. So let's say from about, late 17th century to about 1850s, they were cut off from most of the world. But through missionaries, they could have contact with Jews in the outside world. So the missionaries always wanted to see what was their Hebrew like, what was their Torah like, what were the Bibles like. So that's how we have all these specimens. So we have specimens in the British Library in London. Cecil Roth, the famous historian, collected things, and they're in a collection in Toronto, in a conservative synagogue in the basement in Toronto. I visited there too. So it's very rare that we have specimens from this community. I don't know what I wrote here.
If you highlight it, could it come up better?
Let me try this. No, wait a minute. So you know how to do it, you can come up here. I'm a PC person, I don't know this, I don't know the system here.
So go ahead and
What?
Turn off the camera.
That first picture, you had a picture of the delta where the Jewish community was, and where the cemeteries were and they were destroyed, and then you have this ghetto which you can even see today in the last few decades.
Last one, turn off the camera. You'll put it on pause and wants to see if we can help. It's the highlight.
Alright, so basically then in the first half of the 19th century, there were a few floods which completely ruined the city, okay? And many of the Jews were poor by that point, and so they sold off all the community artifacts to the missionaries. So according to the historiography, in 1851, they sold the last Sifrei Torah and the breastplates and all sorts of silver ornaments, okay? Which we got back through other ways. So then, let's say, I think they estimate that in, let's say, the beginning of the 19th century, there were 1,000 Jews there. Toward the end of the 19th century, there's only a few hundred left. And now, in World War II, in the Japanese occupation, which was very cruel, half the residents left the city, so Jews left also. Now, this book here, you can see it in color, that's the new book by Anton Leitner, The Chinese Jews of Kaifeng. He's the head of the Sino-Judaic Institute in California. He is part of the struggle also, I'd say, too, so that the Jews can be free there. I'll explain that later. But he wrote this book. There's another book by, there's another book there written by someone named Xu Xin, Xuxin, who was a colleague of mine, and he wrote about legends of the Kaifeng Jews, Tav Press, about 15 years ago. So there's other things written, but so what I wrote was a review of the book, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is a design in the museum of what the synagogue looked like. Like, you know how in Yad Beit HaTzitzot and that museum, you have those models of synagogues? It's sort of like the same principle. And here is a painting, it's not a photo, it's a painting of what the synagogue looked like in the mid-19th century. Because the synagogue was destroyed in one of the last floods. So it's like before the era of photography. This is a Sefer Torah teak. So it's Sephardic or Oriental, Eastern. It's not an Ashkenazi Torah mantle. It's a wooden covering. Okay. So, you know. So it's basically it's something which is pretty similar to Iraqi Baghdadi custom. Okay, now these are two steels which tell the story of one of the destructions of these synagogues. These two steels are right near here, the Ben Tzvi Library. The Ben Tzvi collected things from the Sephardic and Eastern world, and he has other steels also, but in the old library, when you went to the second floor, the two steels were in the on the wall as you go up on the steps. Today they moved them, but you can still see them. There was a missionary named White. He wrote a very big book, and from him we know a lot. So obviously he was interested in, you know, the Bible, what their Hebrew was, but he researched them very, very thoroughly. So he deciphered a lot of these different steels. Okay, so this is the museum, what it looks like today. Again, it's not, what, in Kaifeng. It's not a Jewish museum, it's a general city museum, which has these exhibits about the Jews. But last year, because of what happened, and I'll talk about it, no one from outside the city is allowed to come to the city, and all the Jewish institutions have been closed. Go back, I missed. Or that was the entrance to a temporary exhibit about Kaifeng Jewry, not connected to that museum. The New York Times took a picture of that like 2 years ago. Okay. This Jewish woman, when the museum was closed, she made a museum in her house. So they have a cemetery of about 7 graves, and then I wrote the grave of the grandparents of Lee, Wade, who likes to use his Hebrew name David. In the back, a family burns offerings for their own ancestors as part of the Queen Meeting Festival. That also appeared from the New York Times. So this was a picture of the Jews of Kaifeng. There was a researcher, Michael Pollack, who also wrote about them, and there was someone named Sidney Pollack, who wrote about the Jews of China. I'm not sure if they're related or whatever. Okay. But they would take out the sciatic nerve for kashrut. So it's a pretty sophisticated thing. And that's, the Gentiles sort of specify that about them, as that's part of their being special custom. So some of these pictures are on the internet, but you see the traditional outfits. You see also how short some of them were. Okay, so this is a copy of the cloth, of the parchment of a Torah scroll from the 17th century, which is in the British Library. This is a different Torah scroll. I think this is one is in the bottom of that synagogue in Toronto from Cecil Roth collection. Also, the archives of the Canadian National Archives also has one Sefer Torah from Kaifeng. So in terms of old communities, it's pretty rare that there's so many remaining specimens. Okay. Now, I'll read to you a little bit about this scud. In 2003, an American-Israeli Messianic Jew named Tim Lerner opened a school in Kaifeng called Yitzchak, which for many years was the center of Jewish learning in the area. Though Messianic, Lerner has said that his goal was to simply reintroduce the Kaifeng Jews to their heritage. With a group of Hong Kong evangelists, Lerner established an association of Kaifeng Jews in 2004. According to PhD candidate Moshe Bernstein, who studied the Kaifeng Jews, Lerner contacted Michael Freund, the CEO of Shavei Israel, which you've probably heard of, a well-funded Israeli organization that searches for lost and dispersed Jews and often assists with migration to Israel. In 2005, Lerner assisted with the immigration of 4 Kaifeng Jews to Israel, where Orthodox conversion was organized and absorption was financed fully by Shavei Israel in 2006. Shavei Israel opened an independent center in Kaifeng in 2013, competing with and later effectively unifying with Yitzchak and a smaller breakaway school supported by the Sino-Judaic Institute. That's the one in California. Shavei Israel says that the organization of the school offered a more authentic Jewish environment. Shavei Israel has since coordinated the immigration of 12 more Jews to Israel. Shavei Israel, whatever you want to say about it, they, Freund from his father-in-law's money, has financed a lot of Jews from Spain, especially Mallorca, to convert to Judaism, to come back to Judaism, to make Aliyah from the 4 islands, the Balearic Islands. It's sort of like there's an awakening, because those regions were crypto-Jewish for many years, before 1490, even since the First Inquisition in 1411. Jews had to convert in 1391 originally, and then when they're new Christians, their devotion is challenged, and then they have an Inquisition, and they're suspect, and etc., etc. So, back to Kaifeng. Shavei Israel opened an independent center in Kaifeng in 2013, competing with and later effectively unifying with Yitzchak. Okay. So the 3 international groups working in Kaifeng are sometimes at odds with each other, as each have slightly different approaches and religious orientations. The folks in California, they're interested in like a historian portraying the history, and they do research. They have a newsletter, and they made they put out many books of Ashkenazi Holocaust survivors who fled there as refugees in the end of the 30s. So they all have different agendas. So the question is, why is there a crackdown now? It's unclear. It appears that certain local authorities have been undertaking this crackdown for the past couple of years, according to Freund, but no one knows with any certainty what lies behind it. Anson Leitner, former president of the Sino-Judaic Institute, has speculated that the growing profile of the Kaifeng Jews, including a New York Times post about a Passover Seder in 2015, may have raised the ire of some authorities. Barnaby Yeh, spelled Y-E-H, a Sino-Judaic Institute associate, believes that the crackdown is the result of disputes between the rival Kaifeng clans on the ground about the use of foreign Jewish funding, and that it also involves one Kaifeng Jew named Yu King, who has since moved to the United States. Ye said that King's family made reports to local police in 2015, which resulted in police investigations. Ye has since been barred from Kaifeng. Around this time, King flew to the United States, overstayed her tourist visa, and may have been granted asylum by an immigration court. Her asylum may have been granted on grounds of religious persecution, according to Lankner. Freud said that linking the crackdown to Queen's immigration is purely speculation. Multiple messages to Yu King for the forward have gone unanswered. 12 representatives of the Kaifeng Jews wrote a public letter published in July, I think, 2015, in Points East, which is the journal of the Sino-Judaic Institute, alleging that a local family has been scamming international groups using funds meant for the community for their own personal gain. Some Kaifeng Jews themselves urged Leitner, Freund, and others not to publicize the situation in Kaifeng, as more publicly might further upset Chinese officials. In their open letter, the 12 Kaifeng Jews wrote, "The Chinese government has been very good to us. We love China, love the Chinese Communist Party." Okay, so
What's the last name of the family that they think is doing the?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's 107, but I don't know. Anyway, so for a little less than a year ago, let's say 11 months ago, the Chinese government and the local regional Communist Party essentially gave an order that no one from the outside is allowed to visit Kaifeng. And furthermore, they ordered everything closed. So the museum had to be closed. And they had this like afternoon study center, like your car or something, that was closed. And the building, which was their makeshift synagogue, that was closed. And everyone had to stop operations. Freund and his organization, they were ordered to stop their organization in 2014, before this. Okay, it wasn't, what?
His organization was ordered to stop because?
Because of the scuttles, because of all the infighting.
Okay.
So obviously, not that it really matters, but that if it was misuse of funds, if it's like foreign influence, but obviously from our perspective, you have the Jews for Jesus organization, which for mainstream Judaism is highly controversial. You only have a Jewish organization, let's call it an Israeli Jewish organization, coming on the scene much later. And you have these nice Jews from California taking interest. But obviously, it irritated the Chinese authorities. Now, who am I? I'm a historian, but I'm like a public activist. So I've spoken here before. Ari knows about some of my activities. Since I was a young teenager, I was active in freeing Syrian Jewry, freeing Soviet Jewry for 16 years. I took on the struggle to release 13 Jews from prison in Shiraz, if you remember, in Iran. Okay, I even wrote a book about that. So I have an email publication, academic Sephardic email publication, since 1992, which sort of coordinates Sephardic affairs in cyberspace. So on one hand, if you don't know what it is, you think it's kind of rinky, right? It's not at all. it can be very influential, okay? And it's not the issue of rabble rousing, it's the issue of, exposing and community issues. So with the issue of the 13 Jews from Isfahan and Shiraz arrested by the Iranian authorities in 1999, okay, that's a big issue, okay? So, for example, in the early 90s, I once got a notice about the Jews of Sarajevo being carted away, okay? Which, if you don't know what it means, that sounds very dangerous. Okay, in the end, they were smuggled out of the country in buses. But at first, like I heard about it an hour and a half before. I'm one of the pioneers of internet, email. So I didn't know what it was, but I already publicized it then. At those times, in '91, not very many people had email. Okay, but so these things can snowball, and so I made of all the readers, I have ordinary people, academics. I mean, I even have, if you know what France I-24 News is, and all sorts, and CNN. So it's like for example, Jane Zaharia, she's a Sephardic Jew. I know all sorts of people, but so sometimes these things can snowball. You need a lot of time. So when I found out about this, of course, it was like I went berserk because this is a scandal. And on one hand, okay, you don't want to reckon with it, but you also have to look at it in proportion. But since then, every month I make an update. And that's the same way I work with the Jews of Shiraz. You have to be persistent. You have to work behind the scenes. Sometimes you attack. Sometimes you have to lay back. And these days I have a lot less time. But and then it's like, not that I want to badmouth necessarily people, but the Chinese scholars think this is trite, and that most of these people are not. Okay, you're only dealing with a few people, and not a real Jewish community. No, this is not nonsense, okay? Whatever this Renaissance was, it's significant. It doesn't matter if there's 20 Jews or 1,000. Some people claim there are 1,000 Jews. Maybe they're hiding, maybe they're closet Jews, I don't know. But of these 7 families, there are more than 15 people, okay? That we know for sure. So even, maybe 19 have already come to Israel. So of the 7 families, you have at least a few dozen, and then in the outer layers, a few hundreds, okay? And there was some type of functioning Jewish community, and younger people who are vibrant, and there's really no reason why everything should be frozen.
Couldn't the Israel Minister of Religion talk to does China have a Minister of Religion and settle it on that level? It sounds like
my overall, and I'm going to throw out my sting. In my opinion, the Jewish world is morally and intellectually numbed. Okay, does not really care about these things. The leaders, if you call them leaders, do not care. I don't think there's any moral voice at all in the Jewish world anymore. So if things like this happened in Yemen, even though they're not Ashkenazim, I'm saying, there would have been some feedback, but this sounds like so exotic, okay? And we know there are a lot of Jews now in China, there are a lot of Israelis in China, okay? No one really cares. It's not like I haven't done anything. I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people in the Israeli government. I've talked to a lot of people in the Jewish world. I've talked to the Israeli foreign ministry. I've talked to people. I do things, okay? They don't care. One of the excuses I heard was, well, we have a lot of business deals and we really don't want to.
What about the Chinese ambassador to Israel? Anyone talk to him?
I haven't had time to do that. I told this Leighton, whatever his name is, Anson Leitner, I told him, I tried to be delicate, and I said, you're very naive. You are very naive, okay? He thought, oh, just wait. Don't bash the Chinese. The New York Times is going to publish an article, and everything will be all right. They published an article, nothing happened. With people like that, you have to be forceful. You have to be assertive. Obviously, it's better to use diplomacy, but our ambassador, our Israeli ambassador there doesn't care. This president's U.S. administration is just, totally out of the loop, okay? And that's the problem. For example, on the issue of Iran then, it was more popular, and I worked with Malcolm Homeline and all sorts of people. In the past, he was a mover and a shaker. Even I know from our student days, he was a mover and a shaker in Soviet Jewry. Today, I think people have been numb, okay? And you still want this, we're all going home. But, so the question is, what's going on? And Tel Aviv, I forgot what it's called, there's a city that you got the whole new synagogue of the Israelis.
How old is the Kaifeng Jewish community?
So 800 years. I didn't bring the other historical anecdotes. We know about some inscriptions of traders who came in from, let's say, the 3rd century, etc., etc. This is the Silk Road. It's a famous trade route. Okay, but so it's very precarious. Why there's like no echo of this? Because it's a serious scandal. It's a serious denial of human rights. The only Israeli TV had it a little at the time. I-24 News had a big thing, and they replayed it a few times.
How long ago was this?
Let's say in the first month, first or second month even, they replayed it.
First or second month of this year.
Yeah, let's say of the freeze, okay. So let's say we're now in September. So I think if you go back 10, 11 months, I think in all the beginning of 2016, or maybe before, whatever, I don't remember exactly. But Israel's very, very active. I won't say apathetic, nonchalant. And that's like, part of my outlook is when it really gets down to it, it's counterculture people who do these things. But like us and all sorts of other people, sometimes academics, sometimes students, sometimes community people, sometimes ordinary people. The biggest movers and shakers in the Soviet Jewry movement were middle-aged people. Okay, not students, middle-aged people.
Like who?
Like I met in Minnesota, his name was Herb Cohen. Okay, there was this lady in Detroit. I forgot her name, but she later became the international chairman of the Joint.
You're right. Izzy Labler was very involved from Australia.
Yeah,
He
people
was
all over
very,
the
very
world.
involved.
Okay, he's a little bit of a rarity because he's a community person.
Izzy Labler, very involved.
Liebner, he lives
He
near.
writes in Jerusalem.
He writes columns.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I remember now.
Very
Okay.
involved.
Okay, so sometimes he can be counter-establishment. He also was very critical of the Claims Conference.
Yeah, but
They essentially threw him out.
But he was right.
He was
actually-
right.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
had one of his colleagues speak years ago who was the
that he was
accountant for the Jewish agency, Martin Stern.
Yeah,
That's him.
right. No, I was active with all those people and still am attacking the Claims Conference and all their organizations. But so it's like I don't think this doesn't phase federations. It doesn't phase the Joint. Today, right, let's say I'm 61 years old. I'm peers with all these people who are heads of major organizations. It's kind of funny, but it's sad. You know why it's sad? Because these people aren't capable. They were like nebuchs in my neighborhood, okay, on the fringe. Somehow, because they didn't have a good profession, they got into Jewish communal service and became the head of the internet, the head of the Joint, the head of APEC. They're all from my neighborhood. These people can do nothing.
Where do you come from? Rick?
Cleveland.
No, but there are good leaders as well. There are people in the Joint that are, they.
I don't want to get into a real discussion about a nitty-gritty discussion about this, but
You're dealing, it seems to me, you're dealing with an 800-year-old community. The number of practicing Jews today is not the issue. You're dealing with an 800-year-old community, which is itself a cultural, religious, and historic phenomenon, needs to be treated as, I'm not sure what the right
Jewel, a Jewish jewel.
which it seems from what you've said, and the little that I've read, is that American organizations operating in a very American way managed to annoy some local Chinese officials who said, go away, don't bother us anymore. And the only way to solve that is on a higher level with some bows and tea ceremonies, and I don't know how the Chinese work out
You want
these kinds of issues, but that, as the expression goes, you don't give a $100 idea to a $10 man. When people are principled above their level of intellectual, moral, or other competency, you have to go to people who have the competency. It's not going to come from the institutions you mentioned. Where it's going to come from, I don't know.
So when
Cultural, Zubin-Mehta, something like that.
when I went to China, we had some tag-alongs. They weren't exactly tag-alongs, you can imagine, okay? One, his name was Fred, I forgot the last name. Fred was industrialist who had been in Treblinka. He survived Treblinka. I forget, he married a woman from Hong Kong, and he made millions.
Oh, I know.
And marbles, okay? Okay?
Oh, I'm trying to think of who you're
Fred. Okay, but there were a few like that, okay? There were 4 guys. Each did business with China, and they came because they were Jewish and sounded interesting. And they were interested to talk to all of us. Okay, for example, most of them aren't living anymore, but this kind of thing would tick them off, okay?
So unfortunately, they're not alive anymore.
Right.
It would tick them off because they were doing business with China and they didn't want their business.
Well, also because they have a Jewish neshama, okay, a Jewish neshama, and this is really not acceptable.
Wait, what are they getting ticked off at?
No, they'd be ticked off by this freeze.
Oh, by the freeze.
It's a freeze now, okay?
Okay.
Okay, no, that's my point. So
They
you
mean the
don't,
opposite.
you don't have those type of people anymore. You had others, Shaul Eisenberg, okay? In Anu Siemens Sephardic affairs, we had our colleague, he died last year, 2 years ago, Mordechai Rebel.
Yeah.
Mordechai Rebel was a tremendous guy. He was a pilot in Tel Aviv. This plane went down and he survived. He was a diplomat in many places. He uncovered Anusim. When he quit the foreign ministry at the age of 45, and he became Shaul Eisenberg. You know who Shaul Eisenberg was? Remember him? His director general. Okay. Okay. This guy made dams, hydroelectric dams, and all sorts of stuff. And for 15 years, he was the head of Eisenberg's world operation, mostly in Latin America. Okay. Neither him nor Eisenberg are living today. Eisenberg was like one of the Jewish and Israel keys to China, if you remember.
Yeah.
Right? We're like in different times. There's no lack of rich Jewish people. Okay. Yeah.
Can I make? What about if they made it financially viable by having tours? So many people are into these heritage tours. And if there were a lot of groups that organized tours to go to see Jewish China and the roots of Jewish China, surely the Chinese would think, well, this is beneficial to everyone, let's open it up.
So I don't know how aware they are, but obviously there are people who are aware. Okay. When I was in China, I met some very sharp people. Okay, very sharp people. And from the government. But so the thing is, you have like Jewish cruises and all sorts of things to China. You have this guy, you've heard of him, Sheldon Adelson. I don't think you could care less. He has, a casino in Macau, which today is China. So it's like it takes time too. But I think it's like it's sort of like at the moment we're up against the wall. The thing about tourism, they have enough. Countries like that, that's not really their big interest, in the end.
No, but surely if big Jewish tour organizations put pressure on and said we want to go see.
It's too profitable for these tourist organizations. I look at some of the tourist things I see here in Israel to go to China. and I noticed that Kaifeng is not on the
It's
itinerary
not on.
anymore.
Right.
And there's so many Jewish people going there, I'm sure that.
No one
these
noticed,
groups don't want to
no
lose
one,
out.
yeah, no one noticed the Kaifeng's not on the agenda anymore.
It's a
I saw it.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, but I would say that, you
Are
know,
there any Chinese today giants of culture, art, music, and literature who could talk to Jewish or foreign on that level and over dinner or lunch say, look, this is a jewel, a pearl in Chinese history, heritage, the Ming, the Song empires, and on that, it has to be done, it can't be done bluntly. If it's going to be left to the gefilte fish crowd, it will be stuck at Lou Siegel's, was closed years ago. So forget about them. You need people, for example, when the East German Communist government shut itself off and they didn't want to beat what happened in Romania with the Tevach, how do you transfer authority when you're shutting off a government? So they went to Kurt Masur, who was the director of the Leipzig Philharmonic, who was respected by all these Germans, and said, will you be interim president while we have an orderly transition of power to something else? He said yes. I don't think he's
President of what?
the East Germany, when there was no East
Oh,
Germany.
okay.
How do you caretaker government when there's no government? They don't like chaos like they had in Romania. It seems to me, from what you've described, with bluntly, the mess that has been made by the circus of these American organizations, the fundraising, the theatrics, and the Chinese didn't like it, that it's going to take people way up the totem pole from the cultural, religious, historic, some Nobel Prize winner types to sit down and work it out and then have it filtered back down to local officials and forget about the Israeli government, Jewish organizations.
again, I relate more to an older generation, because it's like the goodies and oldies, okay? Question is today, who's younger and is in that crowd? There are many former refugees from Shanghai
From the
who
mirror.
did very well, like Lowenthal, who was a cabinet minister, and all sorts, okay? Again, they're not around. There's some who are still living, okay? But it's like, I don't know, it's like, it's a different question, how do you mobilize people like that? There are obviously people who are closer, China means something to them. In fact, they were saved by the Chinese people, and et cetera, and they have a link. Most of these people, unfortunately, they're not living.
No,
I
but
can't think.
the descendants, the descendants.
That usually doesn't work.
It's not only Chinese who were
They're like
Jews
kids,
were
the
saved by
descendants.
Chinese.
The descendants.
That two leaders, Chiang
Descendants,
Kai-shek
children,
and
all
Mao
of that.
Zedong, each had Jewish assistants.
Yeah.
Chiang Kai-shek had Morris Two-Gun Cohen. That doesn't interest the communists. But Mao had a Viennese Jewish doctor who became the doctor on the Long March. And whenever, this is not well known, whenever Chinese officials come to Israel,
What's his name? Do you remember his name?
Cohen?
No, that was Morris Two-Gun Cohen. That was Chiang Kai-shek's
Okay,
Jew.
that's the other side.
Mao had his Jewish doctor, who in the world of Chinese heritage and folklore has almost like a godlike status. He was our Jewish doctor on the Long March. Whenever Chinese delegations come here, and they don't make a big fuss about it, they go to his grave, meaning they remember. You have to talk to them, and they don't say, they're not like us, well, let's do business. They actually have a memory of history, culture. There's a real disconnect here in the intellectual and religious and historic and cultural and national between the two sides. So that the Jews are, well, we're just doing business, who cares? When you're talking about the communist Chinese or whatever they are today, where almost every single delegation, I don't know what that means, quietly visits the grave of a Jew who no one ever heard of, that should be a sign there's something going on here, there's ways to talk to them. You have to know how to get through up here, and Israelis and the current Jewish organization can't do it.
You're obviously giving good food for thought.
Something along these lines. Somehow we get the heartstrings to undo the mess that these guys made. Requires, how do you go around the Maginot Line? an expression, think outside the box is itself a box expression. It requires a kind of, okay, let's see, is there another way into the palace, the emperor's palace? And there might be. And it's certainly not going to come from Lou Siegels and Ratners and Jonas Schimmels. Forget about it. Or their equivalents here. That's not going to go nowhere. So if you could continue to talk to Les and our friend here, I'm very interested in what you're all saying. Because if there's a solution, it will come in a way that was not expected.
Obviously, in my biography, I also volunteered for a few months with Avital Shavansky. And for her, it was a matter of experience. She was just an ordinary woman, but she gained a lot of experience, and it's like some of her connections helped me with other things. You never know. You have to look for influential people, and not only Jews, of course, but in other spheres to see who has determination, who can be persuaded, and who can approach the Chinese regime.
So can I ask you, hasn't there been displays or exhibitions at the Israel Museum, the Diaspora Museum, on the Jews of Kaifeng, and then people will say, well, we'd like to visit it, but we can't visit it now. So if we get the awareness of the population, and things could start moving, and people say, well, why can't we visit it?
It's problematic. All these museums, I'm battling to start starting with. But the idea is that it's something that's permanent. When you have a temporary exhibition, it comes and goes. And so does the catalog, okay? Sometimes these community people donate a lot of money for the exhibitions, but
It's temporary.
okay, right, and that's also problematic in terms of the memory, in terms of the public cognizance.
But it's a start. It's something that can be done.
Yeah, today also, but we're here. Everyone who came tonight, and everyone who comes to these lectures is much older. They're not from generation X and Y. X and Y they have to see a film clip, and then their attention span is usually very short, and they don't volunteer for anything. They don't belong to anything. It's a huge challenge in the Jewish world. It's also a challenge in activism. Okay. How do you find people, who will join, who will really, just with Soviet Jewry all over the world. People said this is a real problem, and they didn't just go to one meeting. They spent years, organizing letter campaigns, synagogue campaigns, Hebrew school and Sunday schools that had pen pals, and the whole thing, obviously there probably has to be countercultural things too, like smuggling, infiltration. I've been kind of hesitant to contact people in China because I don't want to endanger anybody, and so. It's a challenge. The Jewish world will not, in total, these things can't be forgotten. I mean, I'm not the only one, but it's a matter of, you got to be dynamic to a certain extent to not let this be forgotten, to keep the candle going. I'm the type of person that keeps the candle going.
From what I know, the oppression and persecution of Soviet Jews was national policy for 70 years.
Yeah.
Here you're dealing with a problem that seems to be that a couple of American organizations managed to annoy some local officials who said, okay, go away, don't bother us. So you're not dealing with a national policy over 70 years for all the Jews, of the Tsar of all the Russias, the Bolsheviks of all the Russias. You're dealing with one city where everything was fine until some clodhoppers came in and attempting to raise money and left a mess behind that, of course, nobody is ever responsible for. Go clean it up for them. It sounds like it's something that if one could reach the right people in China, the ambassador, somebody, cultural figures, and say, listen, look, we have a little mess that was caused by some Americans. Can we work this out so you can reopen the city? And now that we're thinking of it, how can we do this better than the way we started with, where it will, historians and cultural figures and educational tourism, package it in a fortune cookie that will look good to them.
No, you also have to
It's a
have
big
one,
problem.
you have to have one local organization, like one Jewish community or whatever.
Where?
There?
There?
Yeah, because there are Jews, okay, it's not just,
Professor Tzu Chin might know who was,
see, I don't even want to approach him on this, because I think they could arrest him.
don't bother him, but
Right.
it sounds to me like,
Okay, he's very hesitant to talk about controversial things.
okay, that's fair, he also has
I know
to
him
admit
25
He's
years.
spoken in the lecture series here a couple of times
Yeah.
in his visits. It sounds like, from what you're saying, the approach to opening the doors to Kaifeng, and then better than before with some new concepts of what do you do when the doors are open, doesn't need national letter writing or protest campaigns like with Soviet Juniors and Jackson and Vanek in the 1960s and 70s, that a couple of lunches or dinners and tea ceremonies with the right people will undo the damage made by clodhopper Americans and the mess they left behind, which of course they would never acknowledge they had anything to do with. They're off raising money somewhere else. That's the way it is. From what you're saying, it doesn't seem like a problem that would
So I'll make a parallel, which is sort of a problem, okay? It's not necessarily the problem for the 1,000 or 15 Jews there. In Africa and Nigeria, with the Igbo, you have Jews for Jesus who pump in about $2-3 million a year. So how do they think they're going to buy the Igbo to become Messianic Jews as opposed to rabbinic Jews? They fund like health clinics, dental clinics, and I don't think they're really so successful. They've obviously converted a few. Okay, the majority know exactly where they want to go, know who they are and what their identity is. But, they can make a lot of trouble. And there's a vacuum, so there's no more outreach, Okay, the Jewish agency doesn't deal with anything anymore, okay? So who does? Just Freud, because his father left a lot of money. I mean, that's what it comes down to. In theory, some young trailblazer can make an alternative, movement.
Okay, I have a suggestion. Just a very simple one to begin at the beginning. Want to go see the Chinese ambassador and tell him and ask for me? Just talk.
Yeah.
We'll bring the fortune cookies, they'll provide the tea, and someone will bang the gong, and we'll talk about that Jewish admiral and what does she, I think it was a she, the one who was the ambassador was also chairman of the Ambassadors Association, the Association of Ambassadors, it was a couple of years
Wait,
ago.
who's the woman? I don't understand.
It was, the ambassador.
Oh, you're talking about here, the Chinese ambassador was a woman.
So,
It's probably someone new now.
after we're done with your talk and thinking like a practical American, I think I might have some simple ideas which really don't involve money, they involve brains. Like I heard you say earlier in your talk about an email list, and it sounds rinky-dink. No, it doesn't. I'll tell you why. The only thing that matters with anything is productivity, not wallpaper, offices, or buildings.
No, I said that facetiously, it's
I-
not at all, yeah.
Yeah, because some people would say, well, where's your building, where's your office, wallpaper. When I hear things like that, I say, listen, whoever you are, whatever you do, Occam's razor, you're producing cars like Henry Ford, the only thing that matters to anyone is the Model T Ford that pops out of the door in the factory. What goes on inside, they don't care about. They want to, can you produce the car, does it work? The only thing that matters is the good of the service. The other stuff It's also called in philosophy the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, which is, well, look at all the secretaries typing and the papers going back and forth. That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is what defined by argument from design. What are you producing? Bubble gum? Well, let me see the bubble gum. What the other stuff is irrelevant. How much did it cost? How fast is it produced? What's the quality? That's it. Or the service. So those things, and a lot of energy goes to those. Let me see the building. Let me see the wallpaper. The only thing is, okay, you want to go from point A to B. How to get the doors open and do something creative to help the people who are there and connect with the rest of the world and keep these luddigs out. So the only question, how do you do that?
Well,
We can talk about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a good idea as a first thing. If it doesn't work, you have to think of another
Gotta start
idea.
somewhere.
Yeah, no, obviously, I'm sure the Chinese, if they really want to rectify the problem, they could make
In
order.
1 minute.
Of
But
course
they also
can.
need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Now, I remember many years ago when former Muslim Sheikh Palazzi, he's after the last 5 years been very involved in Hinduism, but he stands by all his teachings as a Muslim and has given me full, he said you can distribute them. I stand by what I said. I've moved on to Hinduism, but for people who are Muslims, use all my teachings. Once I went to someone in Judea and Samaria and said, Palazzi would like to give you all this information for free. You know, why don't you use this? These quotes from the Quran. Make up flyers, hang them on bed sheets out the window and use sheeping for the villages next door to look at. This guy, oh no, I can't do that. I need a budget of $400,000 and we have to have meetings and committees. And I thought,
From
you
which
know, it's
committee
so-
was he?
what? I'd rather not say. In other words, if we can take something simple and turn it into a Rube Goldberg machine, how do I get this to have money go into pockets? I said, you want to save lives? The information's free. The information's powerful. It's all about ideas, concepts, beliefs. That's how you'll get to them. No, we have to have meetings and we need committees and we need all the things you don't need that have nothing to do with any real productivity.
Misplaced concrete.
Right. And this pervades, much of the world. So I think that based on what you've said, that with a little quote-unquote creative airline sickness bed, please, I don't like that word either, with a little just thinking, it shouldn't be too hard. The problem you've described, Dr. Glassman, doesn't it sound like it's so, popping questions that would cross a rabbi's eyes, like in Fiddler on the Roof, doesn't really sound that complicated.
Except you're dealing with a pretty rigid regime.
Yeah, now talk to them. Not so rigid that every delegation that comes here for the last 70 years goes to the grave of that doctor, which is telling you something about their culture, and they have long memories, and they remember people who helped them.
You got a good point.
1949 till, the Long March was 1945 or 6? It's still going there.
I don't know, we'll find out whether the doctor was.
Okay.
Buried in Tel Aviv somewhere?
Huh?
Buried.
Somewhere near there. It just, Mao's Jewish doctor, enter, you'll find a zillion references and probably YouTube videos. It's a romantic kind of subject. There's probably movies made, books made. Any other questions or comments?
What did the American groups do in China that so upset the
Well,
Chinese government?
no,
Made a circus.
well, obviously it's the infighting, okay. I think that the two, not the Californians, but the other two organizations were bickering tremendously amongst themselves.
Which organizations?
This Jews for Jesus guy, probably from here originally, and then Freud Shavei Israel. Okay, we call them Americans rather than organizations.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter in America. Okay, but and then obviously they accuse someone of of stealing money or abusing their cause for personal gain, and they at least 2 or 3 times they went to the foreign. They went to the authorities and ratted.
One of these foreign groups went to the Chinese.
Yeah.
No, but also the local.
Oh, locals.
The local Jews involved on the various sides went to complain to the local regional authorities. Okay, and then someone in America tried to defect, and I don't know what the issue is. Not that it really matters, but it's You got all sorts of,
Well, I was wondering if.
however you want to call them, but they convoluted a certain order.
Yes.
Well, I was just
Chinese
wondering,
like order.
if two foreign organizations are bickering, why does it matter to the Chinese government?
In the Holocaust, I gave a paper on rescue in Portugal.
Oh,
So, okay, so most of the organizations, they weren't the official organizations, they were Russian and Eastern European immigrants, some were Sephardic, but most not, who set up shop. And one of the unique things they did was they made care packages. Care packages sent by post from Portugal could get into Poland, could get to Auschwitz. Okay?
Really?
Yeah, so that was a big thing to send. Okay, and then they started infighting, who knows about what. But in the end, it led to a certain freeze of activity. And their downfall was they didn't think in being resourceful of smuggling people over the border. Okay? Because of all the infighting, they sort of dulled themselves in thinking of other things. So that was one of the big challenges. So at a certain point, many West refugees came. Okay? They were mostly helping people from afar.
But if two organizations are fighting that are
There were
not
about
Chinese.
4.
Okay, so 4 organizations that are fighting that are not Chinese.
But it didn't bother the Portuguese because they figured for
Right.
them, this is in the 40s, during the Holocaust. For the dictator Salazar, he didn't like these activist Jews because most of them had socialist, Zionist, or communist backgrounds, and they were always wary that these people would become political dissidents and somehow catalyze some type of putsch. Okay. So for the authorities, as long as they're fighting amongst themselves, they could care less. But here, I think it's a little different because, they're complaining to the authorities and we don't like that type of behavior and what are these foreigners doing. Obviously, they didn't think in terms of, we got to protect our tourist industry.
But maybe it's because of the defector.
Also,
Because that's quite a big deal when people defect. It's a negative image for the country.
right, these things I don't know. No one knows. But like what already said, in the end result, in a mature, in a high profile type atmosphere, it takes time, but maybe it can be worked out.
You also have to see it within the context of the last 10 years. The Chinese government is very worried about, with no disrespect intended to them, the rise of the Falun Gong movement, which is, they're afraid will threaten their political power. The invasion of evangelical Christian missionaries, which they see as disrupting their society. The rise of People use the term radical Islam because they know what they're talking about. Radical Islam is Wahhabi Islam. Saudi Arabian Wahhabi Islam has been causing a lot of trouble in the Uyghur province in the northwest. So the Chinese said, more troublemakers with religion, go away, don't bother us.
Like the Dalai, it's near the Dalai Lama.
Yes, and then they're very concerned that religious, with whatever social changes are occurring in China between the people who became rich and the people who are poor, and the people in the country, the people in the cities, is like, more trouble? Go away, don't bother us. It's not just in a vacuum. You have to see it nationwide in terms of their attitude towards foreign religious influences from all over the world, of which this is just a small egg drop soup.
Yeah.
So,
bureaucratically, they claim the Jews aren't an official religion. They come from the district. They come from a people called the Han. Okay, but the Hans aren't registered as a religion. So therefore, like some bureaucrats said, well, they're non-entities, so we're not going to relate.
I'm almost certain, based on what you've described, with like finding the right key, like for those who are Lord of the Rings fanatic and the Fellowship Ring, they're at the gates of Moria, they know how to get in, and Gandalf can't open the door, and then Frodo says, it says, speak friend and enter. And then Frodo says, what is the Elvish word for friend? And then Gandalf says, mellow, and the door's open. And the answer was a very simple one. He tries all sorts of spells, the gates won't open, and he's reading, it's written very simply speak friend and enter. Says friend in Elvish and enter. And they can't figure it out. And then the little hobbit, that Gandalf's the big wizard, and he can't figure it out. How Frodo has this insight and says, what's the word in Elvish? And then the gate. So it sounds to me from what you're describing that there may be some kind of answer like that. Keep all these guys far away. Think there's some insight related to Chinese culture, Jewish culture, Confucius, Moses, history, religion. That doctor from Mao, and there'll be a hidden key that can open the door in a very simple way that no one expected, and that will result in things being straightened out better than they were before, with a renewed appreciation of Kaifeng and its history for the region and the current Chinese empire, is what it is, and everyone concerned. It just requires a little bit of thinking, listening to Chinese opera. Have you ever listened to Chinese opera? Yes.
I don't have patience. Maybe let most 20
I did. It's not. I'd say it would be for me an acquired taste, but they like it. My favorite movie about China is Walt Disney's Mulan, which I can never stop watching. The Chinese Deborah. It's wonderfully done. The old Walt Disney before it's the garbage they put out now. So let's think about this, and then maybe let's start with the ambassador. Maybe she.
Can I just ask, what about academics, like Chinese studies?
All right, wait. So this is the issue. First of all, I don't want to contact my Chinese colleagues. Like I know a lot of people. Okay, I've been connected to them since they established Chinese Jewish studies in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And then in Israel, the problem was Aaron Shai and the guy from I think Medi. They really belittled this. It's like, oh, there are only a few Jews. It's really not an issue.
Who was the person from what group?
What?
What was the group you mentioned?
No, I meant there's Jewish studies now in China.
No, but there's some group you mentioned with the things with M.
So Aaron Shai, he's like the senior scholar at Tel Aviv University in Chinese Studies. And from Jerusalem, his name is Peter Medi, I think.
They've got also Ben Gurion. They've got a Department of Chinese Studies.
I don't know. I'm not so familiar with those people there. This isn't something I deal with. I deal with the Jews, but not necessarily Chinese studies. I have a colleague from Princeton, Marty something, from Chinese, medieval Chinese literature. I didn't approach him on this. He actually might be a little more knowledgeable. His wife did a lot of these ethnic conflict negotiations and everything.
This may perhaps through the religions of China, Taoism, Confucius, and Buddhism, religious people, they're academics.
No, maybe they could have a
So
academic
So
symposium.
I was turned off by both of their reactions. Aaron Shai, I'm a colleague of his a long time, so I have a lot in common with him. But after he just poo-pooed this, I just, okay, forget it, I'm not going to talk to you about it, and
We'll think about it.
yeah.
I know we would like to help if we can, and I think if there's help to be found, it's just talking to be done on a very personal level, and we'll go to straight line.
Right, no, I mean, obviously a first step if we could have a meeting with the ambassador in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And obviously it wouldn't hurt to bring an Israeli businessman there or something who deals with China, or I don't know. Just someone else, as decoration.
Okay, so
I don't know who, no, but someone who really cares about China.
remember, we're still recording the whole discussion, which is fine.
Okay.
But do you have a concluding remark, Les? Would
No.
you,
Okay, just concluding.
could someone tell them to be
Okay.
quiet back there? And Les say
All right.
our concluding
Okay.
remarks.
In conclusion, we've heard about this very interesting Jewish culture of 800 years, a Persian Jewish culture, which miraculously has many remnants, and due to the scuttle of foreign intervention of Jewish organizations and Messianic Jews, the authorities in China essentially canceled Judaism and said, we're stopping all this, but it was a little more drastic than that. They said we're closing off the city, no one from outside of the city can come, no one from outside of China can come to the city, the Jews can't the Mass anymore, they can't have a synagogue. Essentially, as I explained, in the past generations there were 7 families. Of these 7 families, there's probably a lot of people. Some people say there's 1,000 people, I would say there's less. Some have migrated to Israel in the West. But it's something, it's interesting that in all these old Jewish cultures, people's identities may seem passive, may be very individualistic, but they carry themselves, and that's how you have continuity.
Right.
And so there are many people, obviously, who've remembered that they're connected to this community and have come back to associate with. And for us in the general Jewish world and Israeli world, this is something, as our chairman of the city, Aryeh Gallant, explained, it's a jewel of the Jewish people.
Right.
And it's something really that it's a shame because of the scuttle that it can't be, the community can't function and the city can't be visited, because these are very impressive things. It's what I saw there is equivalent to sites like Persepolis and Shiraz in Iran, and I wouldn't say it's equal to Pompeii, but these are relics of civilization, and it's too bad that because of the scuttle that it's all been put on ice in the meantime.
Okay. Wow. So, on behalf of the Rita branch of Arigellen, and we want to thank you, Kerem. It's been amazing. It's been a fascinating talk. You've given us the insight into a subject that is really important. Although you can say at the moment it's like the forbidden city, but who knows what will be in the future. And to our listeners out there, someone who has got maybe a solution, who can think of ideas, nothing's impossible, and this was a community for centuries, so it's such a pity that it will be lost to Jewish history, and Jewish history is thriving, and we should look positive, and there are ideas and there are solutions, and we must use our Yiddisher Kop, and we must come up with solutions, and there will be solutions. And we must hope that, please God, in the very near future, that there is a solution to this. It will be open up to the general public, to the Jewish public, and everybody will appreciate this fascinating Jewish community that once thrived. And the memory, it's our obligation that the memory should thrive as well, and should be something that is for everybody to cherish and to understand and to appreciate. So we want to thank you for a fascinating talk. We hope you enjoyed the talk as much as we did. Thank you.